right, what do you got?
I think I can prove to a judge that both of these men had the mens rea.
What the hell is a mens rea?
It's a legal term the lawyers use. It just means the intention to commit a crime.
Okay, come on, let's go.
Mens rea?
Put the cuffs on him.
How could we have gotten mens rea? We take blood? Can you do it without taking blood? We both use condoms. How is this possible? I want to see a doctor. Can I have an independent blood test?
Money!
I feel sick.
What are you doing?
Mens rea! Oh! Oh! My God!
Hey, everybody, I'm muted. Wait, 1 minute, wait. That was fun. I thought I was muted, but I wasn't. Is that like reverse boomerang when you think you're muted, but you're not? That was weird. I had the your microphone is not functioning sign up, but it was. Psych. Well, psyched me out all by my little old self. How's that? Now I'm muted. What? I'm not muted. Hey, don't do that to me. Don't be that way. All right. Anyway, yeah, I got this notice that said my microphone was muted, and but it wasn't. So I got double psyched. There you go. So I'm not falling for that "you're muted now" trip thing because I listened to myself so I can hear myself because I was listening through YouTube. That was just wild because as it showed up that your microphone has been disconnected, and I was just scrambling to make it all better. But then it didn't need to be made better because it was already connected. So anyway, I don't know. Is that like reverse boomerang? I think it's like reverse boomerang, isn't it? All right. Well, whatever you call that, that's what I did. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. How are you doing? Hi, welcome to Legal Vices. It's me, Legal Vices, on my little channel that I like to call Legal Vices, and I'm so glad you're here. Sorry I was a little bit late. I was running around just frazzled, had some real life stuff to take care of and some real life stuff to do. And it got really, really super cold here, so I had to make sure like all the other windows and like doors and to the verandas and things were shut just to kind of keep some heat in here because it dropped real quick after the sun went down, and then about 30 minutes ago it started to really, really drop. So hey, I'm here. We're all happy. We are all ready for the final installment of the Brice Rhodes trial. The last part of the sentencing is just going to happen here in just a matter of moments. I know it already happened. Some of you may have watched it, but please no spoilers. Even though I think we all know how this is going to turn out. Again, I'll put up a poll of some sort here once we get underway. We should be joined by one or two people as we go along. Oh dear. Now, right. There's one more real life situation I need to take care of here as soon as we start the video. Yeah, it's strawberry. Right. Okay. I need to start over again. This is a wild evening. Oh God. Strawberry, I hate you. All right. Let's just forget anything has happened anywhere and let's get ready to go. We've got 189 of you here wondering what the hell's going on. Make it 190. Add me to that pile. I'm wondering the same thing. 86 likes. I know we certainly haven't given you anything to like up to this point, but I promise we will as we go along. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And let's get on with the sentencing here. What is he going to be sentenced to? Will it be 20 years to life? Will it be 25 to life? Will it be 25 years without the possibility of parole, or will it be life without the possibility of parole? What will his sentence, and will they run concurrently or consecutively? Let's find out. This should last about an hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half. And then when it's done, Chandler Remington and I, we will pick up on our normal OJ Thursday. We'll do about an hour of OJ to try to wrap that up as quick as possible. So here's what's coming up real quick before we start this. Tomorrow, Friday, I will be on Hayden's stream. Hayden has a Friday stream coming up, so I will have no stream on Friday morning. Friday evening will be our very moddy Christmas mods that I have some contacts for. I've already sent out some mods. Please circulate to everybody, all of the mods, the link for Friday, which will be 7 p.m. Eastern time, US. And that means it's 9 a.m. my time, midnight UK time. That's when all of this will happen. On Friday night, very moddy Christmas, where we're going to meet the mods. If any of the mods that want to come on stream and just hang out and chill are welcome to it. And then I will probably be joining Danny on direct for right immediately thereafter on Friday night for her 1-year anniversary stream. And then we'll be into the Christmas weekend. So, all right, that's it. Let's bring up the court and start this thing off. Let's start it off right. And then I will take care of strawberries stuff here. All right, here's the amazing carpet. We're not going to be able to see this carpet much longer. This is the last time we're going to be seeing this carpet. Say goodbye. Say goodbye to the jury carpet and whoever's knee that happens to be. All right, we got the volume up, got my mic volume down, and I think we are ready to roll. And this is going to be a 1.25 speed. Marching the jury on in. And I'm going to move my handsome face just a little bit closer to Olive.
Thank you, Deputy Mills. You can be seated.
Oh dear, what kind of...
Do any jurors have anything they need to discuss with the court? All right, great. I understand that the Commonwealth has a rebuttal witness. Thank you.
Options. We want no background color. What do we don't have a choice? We have to have a background color. Font color, we want, yeah. When did all of this?
The truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you, doctor.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
My name's Timothy Allen. I'm a psychiatrist at a facility called KCPC, which is a state hospital,
What does it stand for?
the Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center.
And what happens there?
So we do competency to stand trial and criminal responsibility evaluations by court order throughout the state.
What is the education and training that you have for this position?
So I graduated from U of L in 1994, degree in political science, and then I went to UK College of Medicine where I got my MD in 1998, and then I did a 4-year psychiatry residency at UK, and then a 1-year forensic psychiatry fellowship at Tulane University in New Orleans. So I've had a medical license in Kentucky since 1999, and I'm board certified by a national group called the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in general psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and brain injury medicine.
How long have you been with KCPC?
Started there in July 2003.
All right, that black
so
background's
20
annoying the
years.
shit out of me.
And are you the only doctor there?
No, so there are 2 other forensic psychiatrists, and then we have 2 nurse practitioners, and we have several psychologists. So there's a whole team.
And are there other employees as well?
Right, we have social workers, nurses, correctional staff. It's a fully staffed hospital that's also on the grounds of a prison.
Okay.
Did you have occasion to evaluate the defendant Brice Rhodes at the request of the court in this case?
I did. He came to our facility on 2 occasions, in 2019 and again in 2022. And so I saw him for about a month each time.
Okay,
and I saw him several times during.
We've got the closed caption thing worked out. That's good. Now, here's what we've got so far. He was Brice during the time he was there. He was put into the state mental hospital facilities on 2 separate occasions for a month each. So for 2 months, for 1 month, and then another time for 1 month, he was there being observed by this guy 24 hours a day. So he's saying, I've got a better read on this than anybody else because he was in my facility. We had him under 24-hour watch, and we can tell you a little bit more about him than people that have never interviewed him.
Each one of those hospitalizations.
And during those times, did he live at your facility?
Yes, so he's there again for about a month, 24 hours a day. So he lives on a unit with 11 other people. They have sort of a common area. They have their own rooms. They go to recreation.
I'll be right
They
back.
have activities during the day, and they have a treatment team, a medical treatment team that I'm the head of, that we see them at least once a week, address any psychological or medical conditions. And so we have, literally 24-hour observation of the person for a month at a time, and in his case, 2 different months.
What did you notice about his ability to interact with other people, whether staff or peers?
Well, generally, we saw Mr. Rhodes function highly. He's articulate. He could explain himself. He could communicate well. He performed what we call activities of daily living. They have to do their own laundry. You have to line up at a certain time. You have to know where to be for your meals and your meds and all those sorts of things. There's obviously some structure to it, but also we have people with low intellectual abilities that we have to assist on these things on a daily basis. They need extra help, reminders of where to be, what to do, how to function. Mr. Rhodes had none of those. He was interactive with me. He, again, could express himself very clearly. And so he was never somebody who needed special services that we ever saw as intellectually impaired in any manner. He could function fully, again, with his peers, with the staff throughout his nearly 2 months with us.
And did you or somebody on your team analyze his intellectual, whether he had an intellectual disability?
Yes. So we administered some psychological testing, some of which the results of you probably heard about already. It's one of the multiple psychological test batteries he's undergone in his life. And let me flip to the right pages here. So let's see.
All right.
So
I'm back.
the
Sorry
testing
about
we
that.
did was in December of 2021. So it was his second admission. And this is Dr. Williams, our head of psychology. And whenever we give psychological tests, an IQ test being sort of the most prominent one we've probably heard about today, you have to give measures of effort. Because if I give you a simple math test and I ask you what 2 + 2 is, and you don't want to get the right answer, you can say 5, right? So it's really easy if you don't check to have somebody not give your full effort. So we have to give those measures of effort, and we did, or Dr. Williams did, and we got a full scale IQ of 73, which formally falls in the borderline range, but he gave poor effort, and we give specific measures to look for that. These are not something we've created. They're published. They're used everywhere across the country.
Yeah, see, that was the thing we were talking about yesterday. Everybody's saying, well, what if he wasn't trying on the test? Here he's saying he wasn't trying. That was part of the deal. He wasn't giving forth the effort to do a good job. So he was faking being low on his IQ test.
Country in every university. So he failed those measures of effort. So that suggests that 73 is a low estimate of his true ability. And so when we look at and then we compare how he's behaved for the month or 2 he's been with us, compared to that test, we again believe that 73 is not a true score. It's suppressed on purpose by him. Now, granted, that happens a lot. When you're in the kind of situation we're in, you expect those things to sometimes happen because people are under a lot of pressure, all that sort of thing. But the bottom line, the important thing to realize is that 73 is an absolute minimum. And if we only know that score, we think he's better than that or higher than that, but we just don't know how high. Luckily, we have some other information.
Hi, Chandler.
Is it possible to fake up?
Hi, sorry, I'm having some
If you can
audio
fake better than
problems.
your true ability.
Give me
What
one
was that?
second. Good morning.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, hang on. You just turned your microphone up. I'm turning it way back down again. Hang on.
So sorry if that was
Hang
loud.
on, let me do it. No, I don't want to meet you. Let's put you back where you were. Hang on just 1 second. All right. Yeah, we have to keep ours right down around 25% for the court. There you go. Now you won't kill everybody with your voice.
I'm so sorry. I think I went on somebody else's stream and I turned it back up.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with the audio, but hello. Good morning. Hi, everybody.
Good to see you here after a few days. We're here for the last part of the sentencing, and we're at the very important point where the guy, because yesterday for Chandler and for those of you that didn't watch, they had the defense put on 2 people that never interviewed him, basically. Well, okay, the state put on one, and then the defense put on one. But it was just weird. Everybody they put on, nobody had actually talked to the guy. The two for the defense were Spiegel-esque. They were just weird. One was a weird old dude that kept dropping the R bomb. Then
I did see
then the
that,
other lady
yeah.
that came on, she was dropping the R bomb everywhere. And they weren't making any sense, and none of them it was full Spiegel. None of them had ever actually talked to the guy. They'd read other reports and talked to other family members and looked at other things to determine what the defendant was. It was just really dumb and really bad. So now we're at the prosecutor's rebuttal, and the prosecutor has called this guy, who was a psychiatrist, at the state mental health facility where Brice was for 2 separate 1-month periods during his incarceration. During the time that they viewed him 24 hours a day, they kept running tests on him. And so he's saying, I have a little better idea than the other experts that testified as to what's actually going on inside his scabbed, band-aided up noggin. So that's where we are. Right
have we heard anything from him yet, or
from who?
No, from this dude.
He just started right now.
Okay, I'm just having a hard time getting over the look. I don't know what's going on with all of this, with the glasses and the purple shirt and the tie. It's not my favorite, but maybe he'll have something good to offer that will distract me.
Okay.
I'm just feeling I'm feeling very judgmental of this dude this morning. I'm not sure why, but he's just very like mid 2000s kind of. There's something going on there. Anyway, go press play. Don't mind me.
All right. And so what he's right in the middle of testifying to is he faked low IQ scores. He didn't put forth the effort, and now he's explaining that you can't fake upwards. You can't fake an IQ test to make it look like you're smarter than you are. You can only fake downwards.
So he was malingering.
Well, then everybody can do it, right? So if you take an IQ test, you can only get up to your full ability. These aren't tests where you can like guess a couple questions and get a significantly higher score. There's an error of 5 points. So if your real IQ is 100, you can maybe get 105, but probably you're going to get a 199, 101, something like that. You can't fake a 120 if you're 100. And remember, 100 is average. That's the average of all of us, the whole country. So, so generally, your highest score, if you've taken it a bunch of times, is closest to your real score.
Did you look into whether the defendant was suffering from any mental illnesses?
Yes. So that's something we are concerned with all the time. And we treat people with mental illness.
So it's a mental health facility.
Or 85% of the people we treat, we treat for a mental illness with some medication and therapy and other things. We even treat people who don't want to be treated because we see the illness, but they don't admit it. So that's a whole process we have to go through sometimes. In this case, Mr. Rhodes reported some anxiety, and I believe he has anxiety. I think there's some records to suggest he has anxiety. I think he's under a lot of stress and has been for several years while he's facing these charges.
Yes.
That's stressful. So we treated him for anxiety. At one point, I think in the first admission, we gave him an antidepressant, Celexa, for anxiety. This last time, we treated him with Vistaril, I think, which is a mild anxiety medicine. And I think he preferred to be on the medicine. It was helpful. But really, anxiety is all we saw. We didn't see any evidence of depression or mania. We didn't see evidence of psychosis, like hallucinations or delusions. These are all things we look for in every single person, whether they report it or not. We didn't really see any of those things.
Did he have any other psychiatric diagnoses?
So I diagnosed him with the last time. Make sure I got my reports right. With really 3 things. One was adjustment disorder with anxiety. That's you're under a ton of stress and you have some psychiatric symptoms that are more than you might expect just for the stress. The second is antisocial personality disorder, which is a history of sort of flaunting the rules and not really going along with societal norms and that sort of thing. And then the last one was polysubstance use disorder, which is drug abuse. If you use drugs and it affects your functioning, you can meet that diagnosis.
And did you see any evidence of bipolar disorder?
I did not. I'm aware that that's been diagnosed in the past, in childhood, in adolescence. And from my experience, children who are having behavioral problems, if the parents take them to a mental health professional, they will often get diagnosed with something. It may be oppositional defiant disorder, but bipolar is a common mental illness diagnosis that's given sort of as a provisional diagnosis, and then they try to treat the child to see if you can really affect their behavior. But as an adult, that's never really appeared anywhere in any documentation about Mr. Rhodes. He's never sought treatment, because when we talk about bipolar, we're talking about really the 2 poles of it, depression and mania. And so we haven't seen any evidence of either of those as an adult. And he's been incarcerated, I think, since 2016. So he's been seen by jail staff, medical staff, by KCPC, by many, many people. And no one during that past 7 years has said he looks depressed, he looks manic, or he has symptoms of bipolar.
And what would be an example of mania?
So mania is sort of the opposite of depression. Depression is run down, feeling bad. Mania is full of energy. And so these people who are truly manic, you don't miss it. It's not subtle. They may only sleep 1 or 2 hours a day. They're moving around constantly. They're agitated. They speak fast. They look hyperactive, but in the most severe sense that you could ever imagine. I teach medical students. I'm like, this is one of the diagnoses in medicine that you can see as soon as you walk in the door from across the room. You don't miss mania. It's severe, and it get to the point where it affects your thinking. You can get delusional. Very often people become grandiose. I have a lot of money. I'm very powerful, all that sort of thing. So mania is hard to miss, number one. And number two is almost always results in a psychiatric hospitalization. Somebody somebody sees you, goes, that's not right. I'm going to get an MIW. I'm going to send them to the hospital. I'm going to have the police take them or an ambulance take them. We don't have any evidence like that for Mr. Rhodes.
Did you review the defendant's interview with police in May of 2016?
I did.
Did you see any evidence of either the depression or the mania in that interview?
No. So I look back at my notes, and I actually reviewed the videotape of this, and I've reviewed the transcript of it. Mr. Rhodes was not agitated. He was actually very calm. He was articulate with the police officers. He denied knowledge about the charges and had relevant questions about it. He was not talking fast. He was not hyperactive. He was not delusional. I didn't see any evidence for that, and certainly no evidence of depression.
But could he pronounce smell properly?
As a result of your
Pronounce what?
2 examinations, month-long examinations of the defendant, does he, due to any intellectual deficits, lack the ability to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the law?
I found no evidence for those things. I thought, he could appreciate his criminality. He could conform his conduct to the crimes law regarding mental illness and or intellectual deficit.
That was going to be my next question. Thank you. No further questions.
That was short, sweet, and to the point.
I take issue with that a little bit, but I presume he's simplifying it.
Of course, he's simplifying it.
Well, because there are 2 kinds of bipolar. One of the other kinds of bipolar, you have hypomania, which is much more subtle.
Carolyn, it's good to see you again.
Hello.
I understand that you work for KCPC.
That's right.
I think we use that phrase so often. It stands for Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center.
That's right.
And this is a state-run hospital.
It is.
And the hospital, there are evaluations conducted there for pretrial clients.
That's right.
And there's inpatient treatment provided.
Yes.
And I think all patients at KCPC are court-ordered patients.
That's right.
And you've worked there for over 20 years now.
I have.
So fair to say that you testify for the state quite a bit.
Well, I guess it may be semantics, but I've testified hundreds of times. I've done over 2,000 evaluations. Sometimes I'm called by the prosecutor, sometimes by the defense, because my report goes, really, it's court ordered for the judge and for the court.
But you are typically called by the Commonwealth.
More commonly, yes.
Because the defense doesn't call
So part
him.
of your job is to conduct evaluations for the state or the court.
Yes,
And you come across a wide variety of psychiatric illnesses in that work.
that's true.
Substance use disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders,
Yes,
trauma-related disorders,
absolutely.
and neurocognitive disorders.
Yes.
And you've admitted at a prior hearing that you are not an expert in intellectual disability specifically.
Not specifically. I've not done specific research on it. It's something I deal with, pretty much on a weekly basis as far as treatment and that, but I don't have, beyond the typical psychiatrist, any specialized training or knowledge about intellectual disability.
Let's discuss your evaluations for a little bit. I want to make sure I understand first that you don't
It's
work
the
alone
last
at
time he's going to be
KCPC.
wearing a suit for a very long time.
You work with a team.
Yes.
But the total amount of time that you spent with Brice, would you say was about an hour and a half?
So in at least if you add up all the time I spent with him, it's probably like in the first admission, he was there 4 weeks. So it's probably a total of about 2 to 2.5 hours. And then the second admission, he was only there, I think, well, it was, let me get my dates right. Second admission, I think, was shorter. It was only about 2 weeks. So that's probably more like 2 hours or an hour and a half. So the total over those 2 times may have been 3.5, 4 hours.
Okay, I want to take you back through your evaluations.
Okay.
First, would you agree with me that paranoia can be a symptom of mental illness?
Yes,
And paranoia can impact someone in a number of different ways.
I agree.
And it could impact someone's ability to participate in an evaluation.
Sure.
It could impact their ability to take the tests that you've administered.
It could.
And based on your evaluation, Mr. Rhodes demonstrated several aspects of paranoia.
I think we've discussed this in a previous hearing even. There's some of his behaviors that I guess theoretically could be related to paranoia. I don't disagree with that.
So if we look to the first report from 2019, I'm looking at page 7.
Okay.
He indicated that one of his habits was to lay out traps in his room.
Right. Yes. In his room.
Lay out
activities.
traps.
That's
Yeah, so
right.
he's talking about behavior that he's demonstrating or talking about demonstrating while he's at KCPC.
That's right.
And at KCPC, he's in a locked room.
He is.
And despite being in this locked room, he had a standard practice to lay out these traps.
Yes.
And the reason that he did that was to know if other people had come into the room.
That's right.
This locked room.
Yeah.
If
It
people had
wasn't
touched
because
him
he
or
missed
his
trap
things.
music so much that he just had
And
to.
he also indicated to you that there were multiple times that he thought that someone had been in his room.
Yes.
that someone had touched his soap, I think.
That's right.
And that would be paranoid behavior.
Generally, yes.
And you didn't bring this up while you were testifying just now.
No, because being incarcerated, sometimes, in some ways paranoia is healthy. You have to watch out for yourself. You have to be concerned about the actions of others. And so, there's a certain degree
Yeah,
of
just
that
because
that's
you are paranoid
understandable.
doesn't mean people aren't out to get you. That old saying.
So I didn't find it raised to the level of what I
True.
consider mental illness or something I would treat.
In the second report, which was completed 2023, you indicate on page 2 that he wakes up during the night to keep people from harming him.
Find that.
It's down at the bottom.
I mean, he killed a couple kids, so it makes sense that he would do that.
But did you say it said wakes up? Oh, I see it. Yep. Wake up every 30. Yep. I see what you're saying. Yes. I'm with
So is that correct, that he would wake up every 30 minutes worrying that people were trying to harm him?
That's what he reported. We don't watch them that closely. They do have regular checks through the night, but we don't have confirmation of that. But I can't deny it either.
And that behavior or that belief could be another classic paranoid belief.
I mean, it would be pretty unusual. It's hard to wake yourself up, even if you truly are paranoid. But I'd say it could be. Yeah.
And additionally, in that same evaluation, the second evaluation, I believe in multiple places, he talked about believing that people were trying to poison him.
Yes.
And that's another classic example of a paranoid belief.
That one I agree. That's pretty classic.
And you've encountered that paranoid belief before.
Sure.
And I think I'm looking at page 6, where he indicated that he specifically believed that the prosecutor was trying to poison him.
Yes.
And that the prosecutor was in a conspiracy with other people trying to poison him.
Right.
And obviously you don't believe that that was actually occurring.
I do not.
And so his belief that multiple people were trying to poison him is a classic paranoid belief.
Could be. Yeah.
And paranoia is a symptom of someone who is bipolar.
It can be, especially if you're actively manic.
In the first evaluation from 2019 on page 7, you reference his skin condition.
Right.
I'm probably going to say it incorrectly, folliculitis.
Perfect, actually.
And
What?
he indicated
Folliculitis.
that he believed it bled or did
Have
not
an
bleed,
answer.
depending on his belief in prayer.
Right.
And he indicated that if he prayed, then it did not bleed, and if he failed to pray,
Okay, folliculitis
hunting?
overview. What?
That's why he has the Band-Aid on his head?
Apparently,
Ooh.
folliculitis overview. Folliculitis is a common skin condition that happens when hair follicles become inflamed. Ugh. It's often caused by an infection with bacteria. Ugh. At first, it may look like small pimples around tiny pockets. Okay, that's where it's looking like tiny pimples on the back of his head. Around the tiny pockets from where each hair grows, the hair follicles. The condition can be itchy, sore, and embarrassing, says the Mayo Clinic. Mild folliculitis will likely heal without scarring in a few days with basic self-care. More serious or repeat infections may need prescription medicine. Left untreated, severe infections can cause permanent hair loss and scarring.
Yeah, I would believe that. I mean, considering the I don't know if he's at a correctional facility or if he's in a prison environment, but it's not going to be very clean wherever he is. Obviously, I highly doubt his head is coming into contact with freshly laundered linens that are. It would make sense that he would have a condition like that. Probably wouldn't know how to treat it, and I would imagine that the prison staff wouldn't really care. Whichever doctor probably would not have resources to really give a rat's ass about it. So,
Well, Alan Walsh says I had that on my face, left a small hole in my cheek. Well, so you empathize with
Oh.
with Brother Rhodes there.
it sounds terribly unpleasant. I don't.
Good for him. I hope it's really unpleasant forever and ever and ever.
Well, see, I missed some of this. So, I came in. You were like, send him home, because the opening statement was so powerful. I'm coming back, and you seem to have changed your tune. Yes.
No, I mean after the opening statements, I said, well, unless the defense comes up with something, unless the prosecution gets their game together and comes up with something better, they have an uphill battle, And you should always want to hear in the opening statement. You should want to hear from the prosecutor and go, oh yeah, this guy deserves whatever he gets, and then you should hear the defense and go, oh yeah, well this is a good point too. So, reasonable doubt, he should go home, and then you watch the evidence and you go, oh okay, never mind. But yeah,
So now you believe in his guilt.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You do? Okay. Because I was sick for I don't even remember how many days, but long enough that I missed the whole trial, which I feel really bad about because I was like literally sleeping the entire time. So obviously something happened to change your mind in the meantime, because last I was
Evidence.
here you were like
you put on the evidence, and that's a
you were like, I don't know, like they still have to convince me. I'm not totally sure, so I will have to go back and rewatch. Folliculitis. Okay, now we know.
Yeah.
It's we have the Marcellus Wallace answer.
there. There you go.
Then it did bleed.
Oh, and it would bleed or not bleed depending on him praying. Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
And this is not a rational belief.
That's not very rational.
And I believe he testified to from the 2023 report on page 2 that he was having anxiety and panic symptoms,
Yes,
and he was given medication for these symptoms,
he was.
and there was a reported improvement of his symptoms.
Great.
I want to talk next about hallucinations.
Okay.
In 2019,
Oh, good. Before he starts about hallucinations, Unhung Hero of the $5 super chat says, I'm bipolar with anxiety and have made it to 36 so far without murdering anyone. Well, congratulations. And well, we decided yesterday with the defense's matrices that they were laying out for detecting horrible crimes and things. I'm a statistical anomaly that I haven't killed a bunch of people by this point in my life. So
You
yeah, the defense, apparently, according to the defense, anybody that had all these various factors they listed was highly inclined towards violent and criminal behavior in their life. But of course, also 95% of chat said, "Hey, wow, that's me." It was just the defense putting on a weak bunch of experts. That's all.
I'll give you 2 real quick fun facts, if I may. First of all, Los Angeles is the city that has the highest population of bipolar people in the world, I'm pretty sure, which is kind of an interesting thing. Second of all, it makes a lot of sense. So people with mental illness aren't inherently dangerous. They are actually more likely to have harm done to them. It's when you combine mental illness with drugs that you become a danger to other people. And so since this guy had a substance use disorder, if he had anything like bipolar 2, which is the like more low-key kind of bipolar, which I don't know if they tested for, then that would make sense. If he had any mental illness at all, drug use would really exacerbate that and it might make him more violent. But it sounds like they tested for it, so I don't know. I mean, the guy only went over the one kind of bipolar, but anyway, that's why I know so much about bipolar.
in the first report on page 2, when he's meeting with the team, he talked about hearing voices, whispers.
He did.
And he talked about seeing things. He called them shadows.
Yes.
And he saw he saw things moving. These aren't the shadows that you or I might see.
Right.
And that's a little bit out of the norm.
That's out of the norm.
And as a doctor, you might refer to those as hallucinations.
Right. So if they're sort of out of thin air, out of nowhere, they're hallucinations. If they're a misperception of actual things, we call them illusions. So the classic example is when you hear a gust of wind and you think you hear a baby cry, but it's really just the wind. Or you see a shadow and you think it's a person. I'm not sure which of those it is, but it's unusual. It's not normal.
Next, I want to talk about some of the testing results. And you're not the psychologist. You didn't administer these tests yourself personally.
That's correct.
Brice was administered an IQ test.
He was.
And his score, the full scale score on page 4 is 73.
Yes.
And that falls into the borderline range.
It does.
You also administered the ABOS test.
Right.
And you indicated that he scored very low on this measure.
Right. And that test is solely subjective report from his mom. But she basically scored him, her responses scored him as being having very low adaptive functioning.
And the ABOS test is trying to assess real life situations.
Yes.
And you also testified earlier that when you observed him and when your team observed him in a structured prison-like environment at KCPC, you saw him able to follow the rules.
Yes.
But that's not what the ABOS is trying to measure.
Agreed. It's a different environment.
So the fact that he may have had the ability to follow rules at KCPC where everything is structured and routine does not undermine the ABOS test.
So they're not directly correlatable. So I agree with you there. Now, you wouldn't expect somebody who you see no deficits to be so impaired as reported by the mom. But so the difference is pretty stark. It's dramatic. But they're not a one-to-one. So I acknowledge that it's not a perfect comparison.
And you don't believe that you have an accurate measure on the ABOS test?
Yeah, that's true. I think, when you're asking, number one, for mom's opinion when she knows the circumstances, and number two is she's having to remember when he was a kid and how he's been functioning maybe years ago. So there's memory issues there for any of us. how do you remember what your sibling or child acted like 7 years ago? That's kind of a hard thing. So there's a lot of difficulty. The boss is not perfect. It's the best thing we have, but it is just a questionnaire, really.
And you've testified previously that the true ABOS score could be low or below average.
That's true.
Let's look at page 7. And you've also testified about this before. There's an example you provide there in reference to the ABOS test. You reference a trust fund kid
Right.
performing poorly on sections of the ABOS because they maybe wouldn't need to work.
Right.
And that's your comment, your example.
Yeah, that's my example.
And you acknowledge that that wasn't perhaps the right thing to say.
That is not a comparison for Mr. Rhodes. I tried to pick a comparison that is totally unrelated to him. So that's kind of the reason I chose it. I didn't want to draw a parallel in any way. It just shows you that, if you say, well, somebody's not functioning because they never had a job. Well, what if they never looked for a job? If they never wanted a job? So the boss will say you're impaired because of that, but it may be because you didn't want to, because you made money other ways. So again, there's impreciseness that we have to consider.
And you don't actually administer this ABOS test yourself.
I didn't. Dr. Williams did by questioning Mr. Rhodes' mother.
And you don't routinely administer the ABOS.
I do not.
And you also don't administer the IQ test yourself.
I'm not even qualified to administer the IQ tests. You have to be trained very specifically to administer IQ tests and other cognitive tests like that. I look at the results all the time, but I don't administer them and do the raw data and all the calculations.
And one thing that could impact someone's IQ during the developmental period is the onset of a mental illness.
Yes.
And some mental illnesses do not manifest until later in life.
Right. There's sort of spikes at different periods of life where mental illnesses spike. And one of them is the sort of transition from teen to adulthood, 19, 20, 21. So that's a common time where some things emerge. There's other spikes like later in life in your 60s, which obviously aren't an issue here.
And bipolar disorder, especially in males, can manifest around age 19 or 20.
That's true.
And that could impact someone's IQ score.
Over the long term, yes. Especially if you have a very long period, you've not been treated, you've had severe swings of mood and several manic episodes, that can cause sort of permanent cognitive impairment.
I also want to talk about the TOM test, and that stands for a test of memory malingering.
Yes.
And I believe in your report, you indicated that he passed this test.
He did.
And these tests, you call them malingering tests,
right?
But they're tests of effort.
Yes.
And maybe engagement in the process.
Yes.
And you can't yourself determine from these tests themselves why someone might give poor effort.
I agree with you.
You can't determine the motivation.
That's right.
And symptoms of a mental illness could impact someone's motivation.
They could.
An intellectual disability could impact someone's motivation.
Yes, but we have a little clearer data that tests like the TOM, which he passed, and the VIP, the one that he failed. They've been measured in people with intellectual disabilities and found to be relevant. But so I think that's a little bit different than somebody who has like maybe a delusion that the person given the test is trying to kill me. You may not cooperate with that person.
So you agree that paranoia could impact someone's motivation?
It could, yeah.
There's a lot of documents in this case. You've been given records from Brice's past.
Yes.
Including past evaluations.
Yes.
And adaptive functioning documents.
Some, yeah.
But you didn't have the chance to review those until after you completed your report.
I think that's true.
And you yourself are not an expert in adaptive functioning.
Not more than any other psychiatrist. I mean, I think psychiatrists, we deal with it frequently, but there are people who subspecialize in that, and I'm certainly not one of those.
That's why you have I think you mentioned her earlier, Dr. Jacqueline Williams. She's an expert in this area.
Yes, and then again, she administers the test, which I don't.
And so you have her on staff because you don't know enough about this material. That's her area.
Well, again, she knows more, that's for sure.
And so you're not really qualified to give a diagnosis on intellectual disability.
Oh, well, no, I disagree with that. I mean, intellectual disability is something, again, I deal with every day. I think I get to split hairs because, it's talk about an expert, and I think very often we talk about expert being, in my world, we think about expert as somebody who's published 40 articles on something.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting comparison. What is an expert to him may not be an expert to what the jury are thinking. So when she's saying, well, you're not an expert, because he said, I'm not an expert in this. So he's right. But what he means is I'm just as expert as every other guy that's been doing this for 20 years. I'm not like the super guy that's way beyond me. He said, I'm not the person I would consider to be an expert.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like he doesn't have specific training in it, meaning that he doesn't have an advanced degree or an advanced certification in that area. That makes sense.
Well,
It's sort of
well, no, I don't even think he's saying that. I think he's just saying, because I've been, like I said, for me, an expert, somebody who's published 40 articles on something, has really deep dove into something, is way
Right.
beyond me. So I'm an expert, as expert as everybody else at my level, but I'm not the guy I look up to.
that makes sense. No, it kind of reminds me of the way that they exploited the
I
jury's
mean, he's a
lack of
doctor.
understanding.
He's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist.
Well, they exploited the jury's lack of understanding of that sort of thing in the Depp trial. Remember when they were talking about how, oh, well, Dr. Don Hughes is board certified and Dr. Shannon Curry is not board certified. But it turned out that Dr. Curry actually was like the leading expert in PTSD and, had been working in that field for a really long time. And to be board certified is an extremely rare thing. So it kind of reminds me of that. You're exploiting it's sort of, it's playing on the jury's lack of understanding.
Yeah, well, I mean,
It
like I said,
feels
this
dirty.
is. Well, again, it's like interesting to me because if you came up to me and said, "Are you an expert on maritime law?" I would say, "Yeah." But if like other lawyers came up to me, I could think of a dozen people off the top of my head that have forgotten more about maritime law than I'll ever know in my life.
Right.
And I'd be like, "No, and it's like I find that a lot with when people say, "Oh, are you fluent in Korean?" I say, "Well, it depends on who's asking." If a foreigner asks me, yeah, I'm perfectly fluent. If a Korean asks me, I would never dare say to a Korean that I'm fluent speaking Korean, even though I kind of am. But,
I
I
know
will
0
never.
words in Korean.
Yeah.
0.
Yeah.
So you are absolutely, I mean, to me, I remember like seeing you read something that was written in Korean and I was extremely impressed. I think it was my first F at Friday stream that I came on and it was something about chocolate chips or something with some tongue twister. It was really funny.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my
What's
God,
JKD Bucks doing?
this white
Yeah.
guy is reading Korean. Like, that's amazing. I was really impressed. So
Yeah, no, see, that's what I mean.
I get
That's why I say, if a foreigner asks me, of course, yeah, by foreign standards, I'm completely fluent in Korean. By Korean standards, I scrape by.
see,
Because I would just
it's all
never.
relative.
It's like I tell people, I'm barely fluent in English. I don't speak English perfectly. Nobody speaks English perfectly, even amongst native speakers. We just do the best we can.
I'm thinking of that Ralph Wiggum quote. It's like, me fail English, that's impossible. I feel like that sometimes because I'll say things or I'll make like typos or I'll say something out loud that like grammatically makes 0 sense.
Yeah, that's my point. We're not even fluent in our own languages. So why would I, as a foreigner, ever dare to suggest that I'm fluent in Korean to Koreans? And I think that's what he's talking about here. Is like, yeah, I'm an expert. That's what he's like. Well, no, hold off. I am an expert as far as this goes, but I'm not someone I would consider to be an expert. I thought it was just kind of interesting.
Right. I think what he means like is for the court, you should hire somebody else to talk about that because I'm not the guy, but I know enough about it to be able to, teach you all about it and explain it to you and to work with people and recognize it, see it, know it, understand it. That kind of is what I'm getting from him. Yeah.
I think it's a little different because he's been doing this job at the state mental health facility for over 20 years. He's an expert. He's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist. He's just saying, yeah, she's saying you're not qualified because you don't know. Well, like here, you don't know enough about this area. It's like, oh no, I know enough about it, but I'm not the guy that's published 1 million articles and has devoted his entire life to this one thing. So he's just saying, yeah, I'm an expert as far as you're concerned, honey.
Well,
Just
I like his humility.
Yeah.
And I like his outfit the more he talks. I like the look is growing on me. He seems more professional, more put together the more I listen to him. I know that sounds weird, but I like this guy. What's his name again? Do you know?
Dr. Somebody.
Dr. Exactly. That Dr. Somebody. Yeah. I like this Dr. Somebody. He's a good egg.
All right, let's hear him talk more about this because I think this is a really interesting distinction that I had never thought about. Experts.
I like that.
Again, she knows more. That's for sure.
One sec.
And so you're not really qualified to give a diagnosis on intellectual disability.
Oh, well, no, I disagree with that. I mean, intellectual disability is something, again, I deal with every day. I think I get to split hairs because, it's talk about an expert. And I think very often we talk about expert being, in my world, we think about expert as somebody who's published 40 articles on something. But I diagnose intellectual disabilities all the time. I look at IQ test results on a routine, weekly, daily basis. So I'm absolutely qualified both to assess intellectual deficits and to diagnose it. But there certainly are people who have more specific expertise, like administering the test and that sort of thing.
And you did tell us earlier that you are not an expert at intellectual disability.
Again, not beyond other psychiatrists.
See, yeah, that's what I like that. I'm not expert beyond other psychiatrists, but I'm an expert as far as anyone that's not a 20-year qualified psychiatrist is. That's very interesting. Like you're gonna say, like in my, amongst my peers, an expert is something that I'm not. He said, I'm an expert in this, but not as expert as experts that I think are experts. Oh, that was interesting.
No problem.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'm out of here. Exactly. I mean, it's cliche, Robert Lawrence, but as the old cliche goes, when you're through learning, you're through.
Dr. Allen, you're free to go. Thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Dr. Allen.
All right, so the only thing that we have remaining to do are closing arguments from the attorneys, and then you will be able to go start deliberations. But I want to give you all the opportunity to take a restroom break if you need it, or to make any calls or anything. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes maybe, and then come back in front of the courtroom doors.
Okay. That was interesting. So I find that guy to be way more credible than the two buffoons they had on the stand yesterday. Those are some weird dudes. I found this guy to be way more credible. Like, yeah, I've actually talked to the guy. I watched him 24/7 for 2 separate months. We ran all of these tests, and he's faking it. I like.
Well, because I was just catching up, I wasn't really sure. I'm like, I don't know like whose witness this is, but I get a better sense now. And it seems to be the general consensus that nobody thinks he really has a mental illness, that this is all just sort of drug use, and that what was it? Well, there is that one thing that's that like they diagnosed him with something, and it's that thing that a lot of serial killers have, that
Killeritis.
it's that thing. It's oh gosh. It's like reactive something, antisocial personality disorder or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But
Yeah,
kind of
they
like
haven't-
conduct disorder. That's
Yeah, they haven't really given him any specific diagnoses. Just he's had a really bad life and he's a retard.
Yeah.
That's kind of all. That's literally like all that the defense expert said was.
But I heard that he had a good life. I thought he had a like.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. They said, "Oh, he had a terrible life because he loved his younger brother more than him. That he was involved in a bitter, horrible custody battle, and he had a horrible upbringing. Nobody cared about him, but yet they put on his stepmother, who was a mental health specialist for the county, I believe, that they live in." And who's saying, "Oh, here's us. We went to this vacation. Here's all our pictures at Disneyland. Here he is playing with his brothers. Here he is with his air guitar. Here he is with the real guitar. Oh, he was such a sweet kid. He loved swimming. He loved doing this. We taught him how to swim." And they just put on a big case about what a wonderful childhood he had. It was weird. And then it's like there was a few minutes like, oh, his parents got divorced and they were fighting over him. And then his brother is now a professor and he's not. So they hated him.
I know a lot of people whose parents got divorced, and that those people never ended up murdering and burning teenagers. So
yeah, well, they went through this whole ACE test thing yesterday. The 10 questions that determine if you're going to be like a horrible murderer, and both he and I have 7 of 10. So
that's the adverse childhood experience test.
Yeah.
So
he scored 7 out of 10, which apparently 1 in 1,000 people had, which still means there's 410,000 people in the states that have it, and I doubt there's 410,000 murderers.
Oh
but
God, is that like a newly therapized way to justify people's?
Apparently, for the defense, that's what they tried. And then they put this guy on who said, "Look, I watched him literally for 60 days, 24/7, and he's not that way." So, all right, we got the jury back in. They're going to give their closing arguments now.
All right, will remain the same. When you are finished deliberating, you will let Deputy Mills know, and we'll have you return to the courtroom. And then once again, you'll have the official copy. All right, instruction number 1, aggravated penalty and mitigating circumstances. You have tried the defendant, Brice Rhodes, and have returned a verdict finding him guilty of the murders of Christopher Jones, Maurice Gordon, and
Wait, did
Larry
we-
Ordway. From the evidence placed
Right.
before you in that trial, you are acquainted with the facts and circumstances of the crimes themselves.
Now, pay attention here. This is what the jury has to decide. These are the jury's options.
You have now received additional evidence from which you shall determine whether there are mitigating or aggravating facts and circumstances bearing upon the question of punishment, following which you shall fix a sentence for the defendant for the offenses of murder. In considering such evidence as may be unfavorable to the defendant, you will bear in mind the same instruction that was given to you in the first stage of this trial proceeding, to the effect that the law presumes the defendant to be innocent unless and until you are satisfied from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty. You shall apply that same presumption in determining whether there are aggravating circumstances bearing on the question of what punishment should be fixed for the defendant in this case. You may consider such evidence as you heard in the guilt phase of trial, as well as the evidence you heard in the penalty phase, in deciding what punishment should be fixed for the defendant in this case. Mitigating circumstances are any facts or factors about Brice Rhodes, the crime, or the case which do not justify or excuse the offense, but which, in fairness and mercy, lessen or reduce his responsibility or moral culpability for the crime, or which demonstrate that he is someone
Fairness
whose
and
past or
mercy,
present
okay.
circumstances indicate that he should receive a penalty other than life without the possibility of parole or life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. In fixing a sentence for Brice Rhodes for the offense of murder, you shall consider such mitigating or extenuating facts and circumstances as have been presented to you in the evidence and you believe to be true. A unanimous decision as to the existence of a mitigating factor is not required. Each juror is free to make their own individual determination as to the existence of mitigating evidence. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not required for mitigation evidence to be considered. Instruction number 2, statutory mitigating circumstances. You shall also consider the following statutory mitigating circumstances which you believe from the evidence to be true. A, at the time of the offense, the capacity of the defendant, Brice Rhodes, to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law was impaired as a result of bipolar disorder or other mental illness, even though the impairment of the capacity of the defendant to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or conform the conduct to the requirements of the law was insufficient to constitute a defense to the crime. B, at the time of the offense,
Okay.
the defendant, Brice Rhodes, acted as an accomplice in a capital offense committed by another person or other persons, and you may consider the relative culpability and sentences of all defendants. C, at the time of the offense, the capacity of the defendant, Brice
Hang on.
Rhodes,
Yoda's
to
doing
appreciate the
something. I'll be
criminality
right
of his
back.
conduct or conform his conduct to the requirements of law was impaired as a result of intellectual disability, even though the impairment of the capacity of the defendant to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or conform the conduct to the requirements of the law was insufficient to constitute a defense to the crime. D, the youth of the defendant, Brice Rhodes, since at the time of the crime he was 26 years old. E, any other circumstance or circumstances arising from the evidence which you, the jury, or any of you individually found to be a mitigating factor or a factor in support of leniency. Instruction number 3, aggravating circumstance. In fixing a sentence for the defendant, Brice Rhodes, for the offense of the murder of Christopher Jones, Maurice Gordon, and Larry Ordway, you shall consider, if you believe it to be true from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, the fact that the defendant committed the offenses of murder intentionally, and that offense resulted in multiple deaths. Instruction number 4, fear or prejudice not to influence decision. In reaching your decision on punishment, you are cautioned that you are not to be influenced by any prejudice or fear of later criticism. Instruction number 5, concurrent versus consecutive. For each count, you shall state whether the sentence you recommend is to run concurrently at the same time or consecutively, one after the other, successively without interruption, or a combination thereof in your discretion. Instruction number 6, probation and parole.
This is the important
Probation.
part here.
The defendant, Brice Rhodes, will not be eligible for probation under any circumstances in this case. Under a term of years, 20 to 50 years, Brice Rhodes would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of the specified number of years. Life. On a sentence of life, Brice Rhodes could not be considered for parole until he had served 20 years of parole eligibility. Life without possibility of parole for 25 years. On a sentence of life without the possibility of parole for 25 years, Brice Rhodes could not even be considered for release on parole until he had served 25 years. Life without possibility of parole. On a sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Brice Rhodes will never be considered for parole. Eligibility does not mean parole. Consideration for parole does not mean that it will be granted. On sentences of imprisonment for life or life without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years, Brice Rhodes could be imprisoned until his death. Instruction number 7, authorized sentences. Count 1 as to Christopher Jones. You may fix Brice Rhodes' punishment for the murder of Christopher Jones at confinement in the penitentiary for a specific term of years, not less than 20 nor more than 50, or confinement in the penitentiary for life, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation or parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation or parole. But you cannot fix his sentence at confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation and parole, or at confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, unless you are satisfied from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravating circumstance listed in instruction number 3 is true in its entirety, in which event you must state in writing, signed by the foreperson, that you find the aggravating circumstance to be true beyond a reasonable doubt.
So they have to find that aggravating
Instruction number
circumstance
8,
in order to
authorized
find
sentences
him
as to count 2, Maurice
life without
Gordon.
parole.
You may fix Brice Rhodes' punishment for the murder of Maurice Gordon at confinement in the penitentiary for a specific term of years, not less than 20 nor more than 50 years, or confinement in the penitentiary for life, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation and parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation and parole. But you cannot fix a sentence at confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation or parole, or at confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, unless you are satisfied from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravating circumstance listed in instruction number 3 is true in its entirety, in which event you must state in writing, signed by the foreperson, that you find the aggravating circumstance to be true beyond a reasonable doubt. Instruction number 9, authorized sentence, count 3, Larry Ordway. You may fix Brice Rhodes' punishment for the murder of Larry Ordway at confinement in the penitentiary for a specific term of years, not less than 20 nor more than 50, or confinement in the penitentiary for life, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation or parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, or confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation or parole. But you cannot fix his sentence at confinement in the penitentiary for life without the benefit of probation and parole.
The aggravating
or at confinement in the
circumstances, he killed
penitentiary for
lots
life
of
without the
people.
benefit of parole until he has served a minimum of 25 years, unless you are satisfied from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravating circumstance listed in instruction number 3 is true in its entirety, in which event you must state in writing, signed by the foreperson, that you find the aggravating circumstance to be true beyond a reasonable doubt. Instruction 10, authorized sentences, count 4, tampering with physical evidence. You may fix Brice Rhodes' punishment for tampering with physical evidence at confinement in the penitentiary.
I'm serious.
for a
That's the
term of
aggravating
years,
factor. He
not
killed
less
more-
than
he
1
killed
year,
multiple
nor
people.
more than 5 years. Instruction number 11, authorized sentences, count 5, abuse of a corpse, Maurice Gordon. You may fix Brice Rhodes' punishment for abuse of a corpse at confinement in the penitentiary for a term of days not to exceed 365 days. Instruction number 12, authorized sentence, count 6, abuse of a corpse, Larry Ordway. You may fix Brice Rhodes'
Abuse of a
punishment for
corpse
abuse
is
of
a
a corpse at
misdemeanor?
confinement in the penitentiary for a term of days not to exceed 365 days. Instruction number 13, verdict.
All right.
The verdict of the jury must be in writing, must be unanimous, and must be signed by one of you as foreperson. The instructions are then followed by verdict forms for each count and a final verdict form for the total sentence. Would the defense like to make a closing argument?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Ms. Heller. Of course.
All right. So that's those are the possibilities, and that brings us to the like and subscribe poll for today. We might make a little bit of a pause here in the proceedings. We've got 395 people here watching the final stage of the penalty phase, and 207 likes. So literally half of you haven't done your job. get down there and smash that like button while we're paused here for just a brief second. It literally takes 0 time and costs you nothing. So please do that and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. And when you do that, take our like and subscribe poll. Today's like and subscribe poll is, what punishment should he get? This is now your chance to say what punishment he should get. Currently, 4% of you say 20 years and possible parole. 5% of you say 25 years minimum, then possible parole. 15% of you say life with possibility of parole, and 77% say life without the possibility of parole. Where do you sit, Chandler?
I need to go back over the exact details of the case. I'm actually about
He was
to take
found guilty of murdering 3 people, stabbing 2 teenage boys, one over a dozen times, one over 20 times, then dumping their bodies in the dumpster and burning their bodies, and then tampering with other evidence.
I'm gonna say life, no parole. That's my vote. I want to make sure I get it right because I'm taking we just finished our last criminal procedure lecture with American law courses that Steve Gosney is teaching, and the final is technically due in a month, but I want to make sure that I don't speak out of turn because I want to make sure that I'm not giving the wrong answer.
There is no wrong answer. It's your personal opinion.
My personal opinion, yeah, life without parole. I mean, considering how horrendous those murders were, I'm pretty sure I came in right when they were describing all of the things that happened with the slippage of this game. Oh God, I don't know. These cases really are just super, super dark. It's like very unpleasant, but I come here to learn and to spend time with you. So all of you, everybody, but Jeff especially.
Gee, thanks. Well, that's where we are. I tend to agree. That's where my
parole. Yeah.
That's where my vote is. Life without parole.
Especially to not have to subject the families to family, I guess, to the like all the parole hearing elements. They will probably, I don't know, if he ends up dealing with like putting in appeals, they'll have to deal with more stuff. I just don't want the family to have to be re-victimized. That's a huge problem, but you can't really help that if he appeals. So
Alan says, I wouldn't want to be up in front of Chandler vicious. Well, then don't kill 3 people, including 2 teenagers, and stab their bodies repeatedly and stick them in a dumpster, and you won't have to be in front of Chandler.
Did I say a vicious thing? I'm not going to prosecute anybody. I want to go into entertainment law. Screw this. This is this is way too much. I'm not going into criminal law. Watching these cases, it's all I can handle pretty much, and it's a little too much. But yeah, if I ever did go into criminal law, I would probably be a defense attorney, so you wouldn't have to worry.
Well, let's jump into the final arguments here.
Yep, let's do it.
Oh, they're going up to the judge. Enjoy that pocket square while you can, big guy. Cow pitches. You and your cootie, whatever cootie was.
To our 4-person, so you will have the copy with the proper verdict forms. Okay. Let me just make sure that didn't change all of our formatting. Yes, the page numbers are exactly the same. Okay, so this is pages 10 through 16.
I know in prison they don't take kindly to people who hurt kids, but are teenagers in that same category or not really?
He'll find out. I guess. I'm not sure if I'm sure he'll find out.
Like, is his paranoia warranted? I wonder how people are treating him. I wouldn't know. I have never been to prison. I know my blood name makes me sound really, really worldly, but it's all for show.
It looks like Draco Malfoy is going to be giving our closing arguments at school.
Oh, it's Morgan Germain back on the stand. What's he doing in Kentucky?
Well, after transitioning, I guess he became a lawyer.
And putting on some weight too. My God. Good for him. He's a little skinny.
It's man
to make sure he knew how to float. Anna, Brice's.
What? Float?
That was a weird beginning.
We all float down here. Spicy
That's
Drayton.
exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, what
So-
is this? The it defense?
Is somebody holding like a little red balloon, you know, from the gallery? Is somebody gonna walk in and oh, this is weird.
That is literally what I was thinking. I was like, so that was literally the first thing that went through my head. It's like, what is this? The it defense?
How
Wow.
to float. Okay. I want an answer.
All right, we gotta go
That's
back.
weird as hell.
What?
I
I literally. That's why I paused. I was like, what is this? The it defense? All right, that caught me off guard. All right. I was not prepared for that.
Oh, don't call them an it. It's a them, Jeff. You have to get the pronouns correct.
I
Sorry.
just wanted to make sure he knew how to float.
Well,
Anna, Bryce's stepmother, told you yesterday about teaching Brice how to float. She wasn't trying to make Brice swim team captain. She was simply trying to make sure that he knew how to float. And we don't let the people that we love drown. I was swim team captain when I was in high school. And I was also a lifeguard for 6 years. And I agree with Anna that it is very important that we teach our children how to float. In the 6 years that I lifeguarded, I was very fortunate that I only had one jump in rescue. And I remember it very vividly. The young man that I pulled out of the water that day, he didn't know how to swim. He had just drifted into the deep end. It was a YMCA. There was a line that cut up between the 5-6 feet to the 10 feet. And he went over the line and didn't know how to swim. He didn't know how to float. He was okay.
all right, that's
I blew
weird.
my whistle. I jumped in. I pulled him out. And we filled out an incident report. And while I was finishing the incident report, he went back to the pool deck. And before I had the chance to finish completing the incident report, I heard the whistle blow again. And when I came out back to the pool deck, I saw that my fellow lifeguard was in the water with this young man again, pulling him out of the water a second time. And before that young man left the pool that day, he tried to get in the water for a third time. To an outsider, to an onlooker who didn't know this man, it didn't make any sense. Why would this young man who did not know how to swim, did not know how to float, keep getting back in the water and trying to go to the deep end? What was wrong with him? Was he trying to play games with us? Did he want to drown? Why did he keep doing this? It doesn't make sense if you don't have context. I had the chance to speak.
Josh Gordon with the $1.99 red balloon.
And I came to learn that he didn't come to the pool.
John Gordon. John.
He came to the pool
Thank you, John.
with an assistant, with a caseworker, someone that helped him with his
That's good,
everyday
Super Chat.
living activities, helped him manage his money, helped him get on the bus, and helped him get his exercise. And they were working together on learning how to float, how to swim. And his goal was to one day, perhaps, learn to swim in the deep end. Now, I have no idea whether that was something that this young man was capable of, but he clearly wasn't capable of it at that time. At that time, he did not know how to float, but he didn't understand that. All he wanted was to keep on the progress that he'd been working with his caseworker. All he wanted was to show that he could do it. He couldn't understand that he couldn't magically decide to do something. And
Objection. What the
he
fuck
didn't
are you
understand all the
talking
steps
about?
that he still had to take if he was indeed able to take those steps. Anna told us about Brice. She said, I just wanted to teach him how to float. And that's really just another way to say, I just wanted to teach him how not to drown. And that's what Anna told you that she was doing, making sure Brice stayed afloat, making sure that he didn't drown in the water. And unfortunately, I don't think that the water was the only place that Brice was drowning. I think from the evidence that you've heard over the last 2 days, yesterday and today, that from a very young age, Brice has been drowning. He's been trying to stay afloat. He's not been trying to swim. He's not been trying to reach the deep end. He's been just trying to stay afloat. And before I go any further in discussing Brice's life and the decision that you're ultimately going to make today in this case, I want to be very clear about what this part of trial is about and what
That was weird.
and what I'm here asking you to do. This phase of trial that we've been doing this week since Monday is not about accountability. You've already found Brice accountable. You listened to the evidence last week and on Monday, and you made your decision Monday night. The decision that you have today is punishment. And nothing that we presented to you over the last 2 days, and nothing that I'm going to discuss with you now, is meant to take away from that accountability or that loss of life. Horrible things were done in May of 2016. An innocent man was gunned down in the street, and 2 teenagers were then brutally murdered.
By your
And you
client.
held Brice accountable for his participation in these murders.
Yep.
The murders of Christopher Jones, of Maurice Gordon, and Larry Ordway. You've heard from their family members, those who have lost their loved ones. And I'm going to leave it to the state to discuss that loss, because that's their place. The state now wants you to lock Brice up. They want you to lock him up and throw away the key. And they want you to be angry. I want you to think about how many decisions you've made out of anger, and about how many of those decisions that you've later come to regret. Why? Why do we pause? Why do we stop? Why do we take a breath? Because when we act out of hate and anger, we lose empathy. We lose our heart. So when someone's life, Brice's life, his life and his freedom is at stake, I'm asking you to do something different, something difficult, something that may be uncomfortable. I'm asking you to hold on to your empathy and your heart, because no matter what Brice did on his worst days, Brice is still a human being. And so I'm asking you to make a rational decision. I'm not asking you to let him walk out of the courtroom today. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. That's not an option available to you. I'm not asking you to give him a total sentence of any specific term of years. Let's not forget that there is now no small sentence available to Brice now. The minimum available to you to punish Brice is 20 years on each count. And 20 years is a long time. But I'm not asking you for 20 years. I'm asking you to give Brice a chance at parole. I'm asking you not to give him life without the possibility of parole. I'm asking you to keep empathy and your heart close at hand when you decide what punishment to give him. And I'm asking you to have just a little bit of hope for Brice. Hope that with medication, he can overcome the symptoms of his mental illness, his bipolar disorder. Hope that with therapy and the help and support of his loved ones, like Anna, that he can learn how to manage his emotions, to regulate himself in times of stress, and manage to live in this world with his mental illness and his intellectual disability.
Did he fake?
Hope that with the passage of time, the passage of at least 20 years, that he will change. And that he will change because he will have something to work towards, something to make him work and work hard on his own rehabilitation. A chance, just a spark of hope of parole one day. Never a guarantee, just a simple spark of hope, a reason to think, to reflect.
Oh, so there's no guarantee. You just hope he won't murder a bunch of people again if he's let out. That's okay. That sounds like a fair
Punishment
gamble.
without understanding is not justice. It is vengeance. And all I'm asking you to do today is to give Brice consideration. I'm asking you to grant him mercy. I'm asking you to give him hope. Until today, since 2016, the weight of his life and what happens to him has been in the hands of legal teams of the state and the defense. But at the end of these closing arguments, that weight will be passed to you. And it is a heavy weight, I know. We've carried it for a long time now. And so while I won't talk for too long today, I do need to make sure that I passed along what we would like you to know about Brice, and make sure that you know what you can take into consideration when you make your individual decisions. I want you to take your time with that decision and not to feel pressured to reach a verdict, to take your time, to carefully weigh the evidence that's been presented to you. Brice's future, his life is at stake. And I want you to carefully weigh all of the evidence that's been presented to you last week and this week. I understand that the state wants to punish Brice, but I want to make sure that that punishment is one of justice, not one of vengeance. And it isn't an easy task. And the law does require you to make a few more considerations before you return a verdict as to his punishment. And you've sworn an oath to follow that law, to consider all of the evidence that's been presented to you, to consider the full range of penalty. You're required to consider the minimum just as much as you're required to consider the maximum. The law tells you in your jury instructions on page 4, instruction number 4, that your vote as to
Bush
penalty
McFadden, no
as to
smash or
punishment
pass for this.
cannot be
Ladies,
without
smash or
prejudice
pass. This is you.
or
This is in
fear
your court.
of later prejudice or later criticism. Your vote cannot be based on what everyone out there thinks. It is your individual moral decision, not anyone else's. And I'm asking you to vote for a chance, for hope, and for an ounce of mercy. I'm asking you to vote from your heart, from your own.
Why should we give him mercy?
And I'm asking you to be willing to do what is uncomfortable.
Is she off her cross yet? I'm so sick of this.
And the law may require you to not fear criticism and what everyone else out there thinks, and that's not easy to set that aside. But it is what is required of you today. Giving Brice a chance at parole is a right choice in this case. It might be an uncomfortable choice, but it is the right choice. And it is the right choice based on Brice's intellectual disability, on his bipolar disorder, and the overwhelming amount of trauma and abuse that flooded his upbringing.
We must have missed that. He had to climb the tree once to get away from
In your
his,
jury
his
instructions,
father
you'll
or
read on page
something,
4,
but that's it.
instruction number 3, that you have to make a determination as to an aggravating circumstance. Even if you make this finding, even if you find this aggravating circumstance, there is no automatic penalty. You may still fix his punishment at a sentence of 20 to 50 years at life without the possibility of parole for 20 years, sorry, for 25 years, or life without the possibility of parole at all. You are also required to consider any mitigating or extenuating facts and circumstances that have been presented to you in evidence and that you believe to be true. And a mitigating circumstance, and I am going to read on page 1. A mitigating circumstance is any fact or factors about Brice Rhodes, about the crime or the case, which do not justify or excuse the offense, but in fairness and mercy, lessen or reduce his responsibility or moral culpability for the crime, or which demonstrate that he is someone whose past or present circumstances indicate that he should receive a penalty other than life without the possibility of parole, or life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Anything that you've heard, you could decide, you could find is a mitigating fact or circumstance. And you don't all have to agree as to those mitigating circumstances or facts. 6 of you could find that his mental illness is a mitigating circumstance. And 6 of you could find that his intellectual disability is a mitigating circumstance. You don't have to agree as to the mitigation, as to the mitigating circumstances. You do have to agree ultimately to a penalty. There are certain mitigating circumstances that you are specifically required to consider. And those are on page 3 of your jury instructions. You are required to give consideration to Brice's bipolar disorder, his relative culpability, and his intellectual disability. This week, you've heard additional evidence about Brice, about his intellectual disability and his bipolar diagnosis. And I know that it's hard to go back to last week and to think about the evidence presented to you then. But in order to consider, as the law requires you to do so, these 3 mitigating circumstances in particular, I'm asking you to think again about what you heard last week in light of what you've heard this week. Last week, the state would have you believe that Brice was the mastermind, the adult, the one in charge, telling everyone what to do, the leader. And they told you this was because he was the adult, that it was strange for this adult to be hanging out with teenagers. We already know from last week that Brice wasn't the only adult present. There are at least 2 other adults who were present the night Larry and Maurice were murdered. At least 2 other adults about which we know very little. And now you know more about Brice, and you know about his capacity, his reduced
That is
capacity.
so weird. There's 2 or 3 other adults that were in the room that watched these kids get murdered that the cops have never talked to.
I'm asking you to
Weird.
reflect on what you heard.
Wait, what?
From Dr. James about Brice's intellectual disability this morning.
Later.
She told you that Brice struggles intellectually and that he has a low IQ. And the state wants you to believe that his IQ is maybe a little higher, and maybe it is, but not much higher. It's still a low IQ score. Dr. James told you that it is not uncommon for someone with an intellectual disability like Brice to spend time with people who are younger. It makes sense. We like to surround ourselves with people that are perhaps of similar functioning. We know but Brice doesn't like to be embarrassed.
Or they were the
do things that he
children
isn't good at,
of
or
his
he's afraid of
former
it. It
girlfriend.
makes sense that he would want to surround himself with
One of
people
the
that
two.
he could perhaps keep up with teenagers, people he could maybe feel equal to, not behind. Brice struggles with thinking. We know he struggled with school, with his homework, and with basic tasks. Anna told you yesterday about her experience struggling with Brice, or with Brice struggling from a parent's perspective. And Dr. James today told you that not only does Brice struggle intellectually, but he struggles with what she calls adaptive functioning, his ability to function and do day-to-day, everyday tasks. And Dr. James conducted an in-person assessment with Brice's biological mother, LaShawna, who was with Brice throughout most of his childhood. Dr. James reviewed documents from Brice's childhood and memorandums from his family members, and she found that he had severe deficits in the areas of communication, functional academics, the social arena, and self-direction. Brice struggles in just about every area of life. Brice is continually trying to stay above water, to not drown, to simply function in everyday life. It's harder for Brice than it is for most of us. And on top of that, he has a mood disorder, a bipolar disorder. And you heard that from Dr. James as well. And Dr. James told you how that mood disorder interacts with his intellectual disability, compounding the challenges and difficulties that he has navigating everyday life and managing emotion and his reactions. You've held Brice accountable for his actions in May of 2016, and I'm not asking you to rethink that decision. I am asking you to take all of this that you've heard this week into consideration when you make your decision. You can take into consideration in your decision the plea deals that are in evidence, and you can still review those if you'd like to, and I encourage you to do so if you want to see them again. Anwan Carter and Jacory Taylor each received 10-year sentences. I believe one served 3 years and one served about 6.5. Now those sentences are not available to Brice, but you can consider how they were punished when you decide how to punish Brice. Even if you find the aggravating circumstance, you are still required to consider Brice's intellectual disability and his bipolar diagnosis. We talked a lot about credibility of witnesses last week and on Monday. And when you want a diagnosis, when you want help and the right treatment, who do you go to?
Ghostbusters.
Maybe for a cold or the flu, you go to a generalist. Something quick, something cheap, something easy. But if you think of something
Hey,
more
I dated
serious
her
wrong with
once.
you, if you suspect cancer or something really serious wrong with you, who do you go to? Do you go to a generalist, a jack of all trades? Or do you go to a specialist, someone whose career and study and expertise is in your treatment, your diagnosis, and your condition? The state brought in the state's witness, Dr. Allen, from the state hospital, and he told you what he thought about Brice and his intellectual disability and his bipolar disorder. But Dr. Allen is not an expert in intellectual disability. You heard from Dr. James this morning, a neuropsychologist whose specialty is in intellectual disability and neurodevelopmental disorders. And she told you how she reached her finding and the basis for that finding of intellectual disability. And she also told you about a prior diagnosis that Brice has of bipolar disorder. Brice has an intellectual disability and bipolar disorder. And Dr. James told you how these impact him. Each of these, either of these on their own, could be a mitigating circumstance. A reason you could decide to give Brice less than a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. And Brice has not only one of these two, he has both. The law also requires that you consider any other circumstance from the evidence which you, as an individual or as a jury, find to be a mitigating factor or a factor in support of leniency. Brice has always been struggling to keep his head above water. We are most vulnerable when we are children. When we are children, we rely upon our parents, on the adults in our lives to keep us safe, to love us, to nurture us, and to help us build resiliency.
Most people know that, lady.
I don't know what word or words the state will use to describe Brice now. The
Retard
government
is one
tends
you
to like
used.
labels.
Which one?
Defendant,
Which one should they
accused,
use?
Convicted, broken, mentally ill. It is easier to lock someone up and throw away the key when they are reduced to a label. I do not describe Brice as intellectually disabled, as mentally ill, or any worse label. I will not reduce him to his worst moments or his weaknesses or his diagnoses. And I ask that you do the same, that you recognize him as he is, a human being who as a child suffered great trauma and who has a mental illness and who has an intellectual disability.
And murdered 3 people and desecrated a couple of
When you make your
corpses.
decision today, you will not have to explain it or justify it. It is your choice. People with mental illness and intellectual disability and extreme trauma are not going anywhere. They're not. I think maybe we all wish that no one had to go through those adversities, that no one had to have such disadvantages or hardships or burdens or experience so much trauma. I think we all can agree on that, but they do. And these people will always exist. And so we have to remove the stigma around these disorders and treat them with empathy and from our hearts. People like Brice need help, more assistance than most of us, more help simply to not drown in the hardships any of us may face on a day-to-day basis. Through no fault of Brice's own, he started this life behind. He never had a chance, drowning before he could ever learn to float.
Oh,
let alone
please.
swim. And just because he has a mental illness, an intellectual disability, and because he experiences the effects of trauma, does not mean that he doesn't deserve to be punished. Just because he never had a chance doesn't mean.
What were these hardships? Nobody testified to
The law
any
does demand,
hardships.
however, that you take it into consideration. Brice does not need to be locked away forever.
Wait, she
What did
just said
Brice
something
not
interesting.
have control over?
What was
as a
that?
parent? Abuse,
She used double
trauma.
negative.
the lack of
Oh, yeah?
effective and consistent.
She said just because he has these intellectual disabilities, blah, 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 doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve to be punished. What she's saying there is
That
he-
that's
and-
what
and
I
that's-
mean
that's
by
closer
not
to
even
the
native
truth.
speakers. Yeah, not even native speakers are fluent in their own language.
and I agree with her there because I think that just because he has a low IQ and an alleged mental illness doesn't mean that he shouldn't be punished. It doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve punishment. This is the most sanctimonious garbage I've ever heard, and now I realize why I could never be a defense attorney. And you can tell she really believes what she's saying. She is laying it on thick. This is a I'll save my comments. I have a lot of feelings about this. I don't even know if I can say it out loud. God. Wow. Wow.
Well,
This is painful to listen to.
well, just remember,
mean-
life is a highway. I want to ride it all night long. If
I
you're
was-
going my way, well, I want to drive it all night long.
Ride or die, baby. You and me. Oh my.
Gimme, 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 gimme. Yeah.
Ooh.
All right.
Okay. Let's just how much more?
Intervention
Not much.
Oh thank God. I'm gonna mute myself.
at a young age, lack of the right diagnosis and medication at a young age, lack of consistent love and nurture, and the
No,
chaotic
there's pictures of
environment
him with Mickey ears. There's pictures of him with Mickey ears.
Dr.
You're
Garbarino,
wrong.
an expert in trauma, spoke to you this morning as well, and he told you about Brice's trauma.
No, he
told you
didn't.
about
He said he was a
adverse
retard.
childhood experiences. We call them ACEs. These are experiences that many of us may have one or two of, and he told you that. But he also told you that 1 in 100 people have a score of 7. Or
No, he said 1 in
and
1,000.
that only 1 in 1,000 has a score of 8, 9, or 10.
How the fuck does that even match? 1 in 100 have a score of 7, and 1 in 1,000 have 8, 9, and 10. How does that even make sense, you idiot? It's reversed, you dumbass.
And he told you Brice's score. Brice has a score of 8, adverse childhood experience.
I thought he said 7. I thought he said he had a 7.
So when I say
I
that
was-
Brice
I
never
was the
had a
same as
chance,
him.
when I say Brice started from behind, and when I say that Brice has been just barely managing to not drown, or perhaps have been drowning, that is why. I don't want to go
That is
through each individual adverse childhood experience because you've just
How
heard
about
that
just telling us
testimony.
one?
But what you heard from Dr. Garbarino as he talked about each factor was a glimpse into the chaos and abuse of Brice's life, of his childhood. We heard from Anna yesterday that she knew that there was abuse going on in his mother's household. And Dr. Garbarino told you today that Brice's stepfather would emotionally abuse Brice, alienating him from his own family. Brice was made to feel that he wasn't loved. He was alienated by those who were supposed to protect and love him.
Oh, welcome to my
Anna
fucking
told you
world,
about the
Bryce.
time that his mother came to take Brice home, how Brice cried, and how he didn't want to go. and
I
about
was
that
shunned by
custody
one of my
battle that
cousins
should
for
never
8
happen
years.
in
I
front
didn't
of a
go
child
around
that
killing
way.
people.
Oh, you're
He was
lost.
afraid to go home. That was the type of environment that he grew up in. one he was afraid to return to. He was punished with physical violence. And his stepfather physically abused his mother. And because Brice's mother was in an abusive relationship, dealing with her own very violent trauma and survival, Brice was left unprotected to observe the brutal violence committed by his stepfather against her. He saw him cut his mother's hair off, you heard that today, drag her and smash her face. That's something none of us want any child to ever have to
I
witness.
must have missed that part. I
Brice
didn't hear
witnessed
that.
this experience and much more.
Again, very sad.
And so his
but-
development was stunted, it was changed.
So what?
He was developmentally crushed by the adversity and trauma that he experienced in his childhood on top of his mental health and intellectual disability.
Crushed, you say?
I've asked you to have hope for Brice. And Dr. Garbarino and Dr. James have told you that there is hope. Brice is not a lost cause. He has overwhelming challenges that he's going to have to overcome and decide for himself to overcome. And he cannot do it alone. Dr. Garbarino and Dr. James told you that he does have the capacity for change, the capacity for hope. He needs to be medicated, and he needs therapy, and he needs time. And no matter your decision today.
Well, that's what I mean. Volkswagen says, talking about there was testimony that this happened. There wasn't testimony that happened. They said that was, the Dr. Spiegel retard guy talked to his brother and said that Brice saw that. So
Which
a
is
brother
hearsay upon
saying
hearsay.
a brother saying that Brice said that is not the same thing as it being, testified to in court or presenting evidence of it. So yeah, that we just have a bunch of this shit because nobody bothered to talk to him, or he wouldn't talk to them. As
Maybe it happened and maybe it didn't, but the nature of the crime is incredibly violent. It's deeply disturbing. I don't see the jury really buying this, honestly.
no,
Yeah. I mean,
not a chance.
I would want to sentence him to worse just to spite this bitch. And that's just me, personally. So,
well, see, that's what we were talking a little bit about yesterday when people were saying it. We were comparing jurisdictions where the judge handles the sentencing. Now, again, the jury here does not have the last say. This is not the end of it. The jury, they come back with their verdict, and then the court will consider the jury's recommendation. It's essentially the jury's making a recommendation to the court. And then the court will eventually come back, 1, 2, 3 months later, and then issue the final sentencing verdict.
right.
During that time, there'll be motions maybe going back and forth. There'll be things happening, and then eventually he's going to review it and go, okay, either this needs to be changed, or, I support the jury. And the vast majority of the time, they follow the jury's recommendations. This is dumb. We were talking about the differences between the judge doing it and the jury doing it. It's life without parole is the most you can do. But I would tend to think that the judges would go, all right, he's life without the possibility of parole. We can either go life without possibility of parole, then consecutively have another life without parole, then consecutively have another life without parole. But he's got life without parole, so we may as well just run everything together concurrently because it doesn't really matter. He's never walking out the doors. Whereas if a jury really wanted to show that they hated the guy and he deserved horrible, horrible punishment, they would say the same thing, but they would run them consecutively instead of concurrently. Because that's really all they can do is go, yeah, he serves the first life sentence, then he has to serve the second life sentence. That's really the only difference between having a judge do it and having a jury do it.
Can I just say, I feel like her argument, it makes so little sense because they're not doing an NGI plea. They're not doing not guilty by reason of insanity. He was found fit to stand trial. There's no option for him to go to a mental hospital. So clearly those things don't factor in heavily enough for them to consider him to have been, motivated by, some break with reality. And if she couldn't get that for her client, I don't really see how her getting up and, making this sanctimonious plea is really going to do anything. I mean, anybody who saw that evidence, I didn't even have to see the worst of it. We didn't see the worst of it. They didn't show it, to everybody. Those images are, I can't imagine having to live with that. I would never in my wildest dreams think, let's go easy on the guy that, that burned the corpses of 2 teenagers and then ate White Castle afterwards.
We'll wrap her up, then we'll read the super chats here.
He's going to have access to those 3 things. He can receive medication and therapy in prison and he's likely going to serve at least 20 years. So he's going to have plenty of time in prison. The time that he needs to work on himself. And he can also
Self-improvement.
receive and be ordered to maintain his medication and his mental health treatment if he is ever granted parole. His stepmother, Anna, will also be there if he's paroled. She told you that. She's been in
His
the mental health
stepmother will
profession
be
in this
so
area
dead
and
before he
been
ever
involved
gets
with
out of prison,
28 years.
regardless of what
She
the
can help,
sentence is.
and she wants to help Brice connect with mental health professions in the area. Sorry, with the resources available to him. And if he fails to do what he is told, his parole can be revoked and he can be sent back. And if he doesn't try in the first place, if he doesn't try medication, if he doesn't try therapy, if he doesn't try the programming that's available to him in the Department of Corrections, if he doesn't apply himself, he may never be paroled. Which is why I'm asking you to give him that chance, that hope to work towards. Give him a purpose to work towards, to keep him on track. He has a lot to overcome, and it may seem insurmountable to you. It may feel easy to give up on Brice and to do as the state asks you, to throw away the key. But I'm asking you not to. And the law does require you to consider all of the evidence from all of the witnesses and to take into consideration
Vogue,
Brice's mental illness,
Vogue,
his intellectual disability, his relative culpability,
Vogue to the music.
his trauma, and anything else from the evidence presented to you that in your empathy and your whole heart, you find cause for leniency. I want
An
to
orchestra
end
for victims.
by taking us
maestro.
back to what Anna told us about Brice's brother.
Oh no.
Brice's brother came to their family at about the same time that Brice himself did. And his brother also struggled with school. She told us.
This is his brother Chandler, by the way.
Oh, I have a namesake.
Yes, this is his brother Chandler.
Oh, you
had
mentioned this,
behavioral
yeah.
outbursts as
Yeah.
well. Anna wanted both Brice and his brother to stay with them, to attend a good school with good resources, to be assessed and to receive help at school, to be loved and nurtured, and above all else, safe. We know that when Brice was with Anna, he came out of his shell. He let down his guard. He got just a taste of what it was like to be loved, to be safe and protected. But Brice did not get to be with Anna for very long. His brother did. His brother stayed. And his brother went on to excel at sports and at school and is now a professor. And you know where Brice is. Brice is right here. Sitting here today. His fate in your hands.
Well, I guess
With
my son's
love,
going to be a
With
murderer.
intervention, with treatment and consistency, Brice's brother was able to find resiliency and eventually stability that led to his success. And I think the evidence presented to you over the last 2 days shows that while Brice did not have the love, intervention, treatment, or consistency in his childhood, that he can find those things in his future, behind bars in a correctional setting, and that he will have the best motivation if you grant him the mercy of a chance at parole to work towards. On Monday, you didn't have the opportunity to know Brice, to take into consideration his life and his mental health. Just as any onlooker at the pool that day at the YMCA when I had my first rescue, just as any onlooker did not have the opportunity to understand the young man that I pulled out of the pool and then got back in the water 2 more times. You did not on Monday have the opportunity to understand Brice. I mean, you now had an opportunity. You know more about who Brice is. I wish that 9-year-old Brice was here and that he could tell you from his heart what his life was like and what he was going through at that time, but 9-year-old Brice isn't here. And we can't save 9-year-old Brice. But there is something that we can do, because I think Brice is still drowning. And
Finish
it
the
may take some
job.
time for him to learn to float again. But I ask you to give him that chance to show that he can change. I'm asking you to give him a chance at parole, a chance at life, a chance at hope.
Okay,
Oh
you're
my
just
god,
being
you're the
redundant.
lifeguard. Save him. My god, he's right there. I can't.
All right. Let's crush it. She's like, I can't even. I'm just gonna crush everybody here right now. All right, before the prosecution cleans house here, DCV Titans. So, what his mom should have been teaching him not to kill instead of how to float. Interesting argument. This is how you don't kill. Unhung hero, lock him up and throw away the key. And DCV Titan with 5 more Canadian bucks. Keep bringing up this mental disabilities and how others also suffer these same disabilities without having murdered 3 people. I wouldn't be surprised if you hear some of that in the prosecution's closing arguments here. And Sonia or Chris, the more she talks, the more I want to them to throw away the key. Yeah, that's not what you're supposed to do as a defense lawyer. You're supposed to make people want to side with you and feel that empathy, not go, oh my God, you're just making it worse.
So this is why. Oh, no, sorry.
And Paul Diab says, is that Rumpel in drag? So are you suggesting that Rumpel wears women's clothing and then dresses up like a man? Is that what you're suggesting? No, that's Rumpel in his native habitat.
Rumpel?
Runkle of the Bailey, Ian.
Oh,
Like little, yeah.
I saw Rumpel and I thought it was some character on some show or something that I wasn't aware of.
Well, there's Rumpel of the Bailey.
Runkle.
Yeah.
With a K. I thought it was like Rumpelstiltskin or something like that. Never mind. Got it. I'm caught up. It's early yet.
There's a character Rumpel of the Bailey, which is where Runkle takes his name, Runkle of the Bailey.
Oh, that's right. I think I did know that at some point. I became aware, but I'm not familiar with the character because I'm too lazy to Google things all the time.
All right. Oh, wait. Here she goes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not asking you to lock him up and throw away the key. What I'm asking is that you impose legally allowed.
I'm asking you, she's a fucking microphone.
Of this proceeding where he has been given the due process that we all enjoy in this country. These are the sentences that you're allowed to give. 20 to 50 years. In this case, his parole eligibility would be 85% of the sentence, but will cap with a parole eligibility of 20 years. So once it passes 24 years, for the rest of that, 5 years, 40 years, 50 years, his parole eligibility is 20 years. So
she likes those charts.
Life, where the parole eligibility is also 20 years. Life without parole for 25 years. So it's a 5-year difference between that life and this type of life. And then the final possibility, life without parole at all. And that is what we are asking for. We are asking for that for a number of reasons that I will go through here. Obviously, you also consider whether these sentences run concurrently or consecutively to each other, and you consider the sentences for the other crimes. I'm going to focus on this because this is obviously the bulk of what we're talking about here. Now, when you're making a determination, as you see from your instructions, you are allowed to consider the things that you have heard the entire trial. You are allowed to consider.
I hate this woman.
The horrific nature of these murders. You are allowed to consider the effects on the family. You are allowed to consider Christopher Jones, father of 3.
I hate this woman and her mic skills.
Never got to meet. Beloved brother. You're allowed to consider Larry and Maurice, sons, grandsons, brothers.
You did ask her to get closer.
A little sister they never met named Larissa, for Larry and Maurice. Their lives cut so tragically short. You can consider all that. And yes, you can consider the mitigating factors if you believe them to be true. Now, one of them listed here is that at the time of the offense,
oh God, how long is this?
To appreciate the criminality of his conduct to the requirements of the law, was impaired as a result.
Oh, good. Only about 5 minutes. We can deal with it.
And you heard from Dr. Allen that that was not true. And Dr. Allen is an expert, just not in the administration of IQ tests, but none of the people you heard from today administered IQ tests. Dr. Allen, as opposed to the other 2 experts, did have the opportunity to observe the defendants, to speak with them. And he concluded that to the extent that the defendant had bipolar disorder at all, if that was even true, he was not actively suffering from it at the time of these murders. He was not impelled by bipolar disorder to commit these murders. He was not in a manic episode. He saw the interview that occurred 2 days later. You saw the interview as well. And Dr. Allen told you that mania is apparent to even a casual observer. And you could tell from your own observation of that interview. He was not excited. He was not suffering from some compelled need to speak. He was calm. He was answering questions as you would expect somebody in an interview to answer. So you can consider this. I would ask you to consider the veracity of it and find that it is not true based on Dr. Allen's testimony. The same for C. I'll skip to C. And that is that an intellectual disability caused him to be unable to appreciate the criminality of his conduct. For perform his conduct to the requirement of the law. Now, there's no doubt that there's some intellectual challenges here. The experts disagree on the severity of those. You've heard that it's hard to get an actual read because of his lack of effort. The IQ test, the earliest one, when he was 10 years old, showed an IQ of 90. The flood effects were 86, taking him to the below average range. And Dr. Allen told you can't fake up, which indicates that 90 down with a range down to 86 would be a more accurate representation because that is the highest one. And that is before he had motivations. And all the subsequent tests, they were things like trying to get disability benefits, or when he was 16 and in school, or when he was facing criminal charges. So we have reasons to put in less than full effort on those tests. But regardless of what his level of intellectual is, he still had the capacity to appreciate that this conduct was wrong. He still had the ability to make different choices about this conduct. And so based on what Dr. Allen told you, I would ask you to cross out C. It's not true as well. Now to return to B. At the time of the defense acted as an accomplice in a capital offense committed by another person. He was the one that was directed at times. They were the accomplices to him. Sure, take into consideration their sentences. They each got 10 years before he served until he was paroled. Anwan at his 18th birthday was placed on probation, and we'll see what happens down the road from that. But this total sentences were 10 years on charges of facilitation of murder. So that's 10 years for being forced by Brice Rhodes to take a knife and stab people that he had already killed. Yeah, they should have said no. They should have banded together, tried to get out of the situation. They should have, when he left from there to clean, run out onto Brownsboro Road and flag down a car and ask that driver to call 911. They didn't. They're paying a price. But if they want you to consider those charges, those sentences relative to what he should get, 10 years for being forced to make 2 or 3 stab wounds, what does he get for 21 stab wounds for Larry? 8+ for Maurice, shooting Christopher Jones. A lot more than those boys got. T is the youth of the defendant, if you consider 26 to be young in this context. Any other circumstances? You've heard about his childhood. This, I believe, cuts both ways. No child should have to see his mother be the victim of a domestic violence situation. That's awful that that happened. And that's probably why we see some domestic violence charges in his history. That explains that.
Wait, she's going back to her let's help the defense make their case thing that she does.
To make different choices. He had a loving stepmother. Sounds like his father was very involved. Not all children get trips to Disney World and get red Harry Potter at night. So I don't know how you choose to weigh that.
Exactly.
A lot of what we know from these last 2 days come from reports about what happened. For instance, we've heard no direct testimony of what exactly was going on with his mom. We've heard what his stepmother told the interviewers. So weigh that how you will. And again, I'm not saying that there wasn't trauma in his childhood. But there's nothing from that that indicates he doesn't have control over his decisions, over the choices.
The part of that I heard was the important part.
The mitigating circumstances that you believe to be true. And there's no system in Kentucky where you add some points, take away some points based on, like 3 years for this, -5 years for that. No, you just consider the whole of it as you decide upon where in this range you choose to fix the penalty. The aggravating circumstance that is listed here is whether you believe that the defendant committed the offenses of murder intentionally and that they resulted in multiple deaths. And this is something you considered 2 days ago when you were deliberating. That these were intentional murders, that obviously there were multiple murders. So hopefully that won't take you that long to reach that same decision. And what that, under the law, what that allows is these 2 additional penalties here that wouldn't be allowed if those were not the case. So if you don't find that to be true, these would be your choices. If you do find that to be true, you will also get life without parole for 25 or life without parole. And again, I believe that you have already found this. I hope you will continue today to find this aggravating circumstance to be true. You are allowed to consider his past criminal conduct, which started when he was 18 with intimidation, 3 counts, possession of a handgun without a license, for which he got 4 years. He also, around that same time period, committed 4 counts of armed robbery, confinement, for which he got 12 years, but was probated. And that is of interest to us because he later violated that probation. In 2013, which he would have been 22 then, his birthday is September 1st, 90, so that August he was 22, he committed an assault fourth domestic violence. He violated his probation twice. At age 23, he committed 2 counts of battery resulting in bodily injury, received a year and a half, violated his probation in that case. In 2014, so age 23, assault fourth, domestic violence again, and he violated his probation in that case. And at age 25, he murdered 3 people. The government of 2 different counties gave him chance after chance on probation. And every time he violated that probation, he was not able to live under the conditions of probation without being brought back to court and revoked on them. Chance after chance, and it didn't stop what happened here. And that is one reason that I'm asking you to give a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, because we already know that that did not, the supervision of the probation and parole offices of 2 different counties did not reform his actions and did not stop this from happening. So you're allowed to consider all of this. So then you just go through the instructions just like you did
Fuck me.
on Monday. They're all listed here. Verdict form number 1. You pick if you do or do not find the aggravated circumstance of intentional multiple murders. And then on the corrected copy, you will see that there is a list where you check which one of those penalties that you believe that it should be. I don't know how a family processes the loss of any loved one.
Wander some more.
I'm sure you never fully get over it. But at least the family of Christopher Jones can say to themselves, the last day, he was still conscious, the last thing he heard was Officer Franklin saying, hang in there, buddy.
Oh God, I just want to mic her so bad.
Franklin holding the tape. The families of Larry and Maurice have no such peace. Their deaths were not reported. They each died alone and betrayed by people they trusted. They each died knowing the other was somewhere in that room and not knowing what would happen to the other. They each died horrific deaths. And I do not think that the Wren family, the Ordway family, should ever have to go to sleep at night not knowing where Brice Rhodes is. There are multiple reasons for the prison system. Rehabilitation is one. Punishment is one. Removal is one. And I would argue that the 2 latter are what is most important in this case. I don't want you to punish out of passion or anger, but out of justice for what he did to these 3 people and to their whole families. And I ask you to remove him for life without the possibility of parole, so that they never have to worry about this again.
Oh, is she finished? I didn't even hear her finish.
Ladies and gentlemen, you will begin your deliberations again now.
Phrasing.
Stay with the jurors. Same thing as last time. If you have any questions or anything that you need to report, just knock on the door.
All right. So then they go into deliberations for about an hour as I scan through here. And then they came back with the verdict.
See, I really actually wanted to hear what she had to say there, but you got to use
Yeah,
the
I
mic,
got about
people.
a third of it. All right. Here's the moment we've all been waiting for, the actual verdict coming in.
All right. In the matter of Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Brice Rhodes, the jury's verdict is as follows. Count 1, murder as to Christopher Jones. We, the jury, do find beyond a reasonable doubt that an aggravating circumstance exists in this case and fix the defendant's punishment for the murder of Christopher Jones at life without the possibility of
Boom,
parole.
done. He's going away.
For count 2, as to Maurice Gordon, we, the jury, do find beyond a reasonable doubt that an aggravating circumstance exists in this case and fix the defendant's punishment for the murder of Maurice Gordon at life without the possibility of parole.
He doesn't give a shit.
As to count 3, murder Larry Ordway, we, the jury, do find beyond a reasonable doubt that an aggravating circumstance exists in this case and fix the defendant's punishment for the murder of Larry Ordway at life without the possibility of parole. For count 4, tampering with physical evidence, we fix the defendant's punishment for tampering with physical evidence at 5 years. Count 5, abuse of a corpse, Maurice Gordon, we fix the defendant's punishment for abuse of a corpse at 1 year or 365 days. Count 6, abuse of a corpse, Larry Ordway, we fix the defendant's punishment for abuse of a corpse at 1 year or 365 days. We, the jury, further recommend that the punishments fixed for the defendant as set forth above be served as follows. All sentences to be served consecutively, meaning one after the other. Signed by the
that's what we're
foreperson
talking
as
about.
to all counts.
So yeah, he has to die, and then he'll start his second life without parole. Then he has to die again, and then he'll start his third life sentence. So there you go.
I will now ask each of you if this is your verdict. Yes. It's okay. All right, jurors, thank you for your service. I will be speaking with you a little bit further in just a few minutes. I'm going to have you go back into the deliberation room, and I'll be in there in just a few moments to speak with you, and just for a little bit. Thank you all.
All right, jury.
All right, so the jury goes out, and she's got a couple more things to
Oh,
say.
we need,
Yeah.
all right, you'll probably see them. Anyone who wishes to leave now may do so. We need to set a separate date at which the court will have final sentencing.
What sort of timetable judges probation and parole on for PSI right now?
So ordinarily, we would pass 6 to 8 weeks. And I think in this instance, it would be prudent to go into mid to late March if that's acceptable for you all. And should we perhaps put this case on in the afternoon where we have a little more time, a little more open of a courtroom?
That's fine, Judge.
All right. How about March 13th at 1:30?
All right, March 13th.
That works for us, yeah.
Right. March 13th, 1:30 p.m. Is there anything else that we need to address from any party?
Judge, there are a number of other cases that were assigned to different courtrooms. Judge Cunningham just took them all to make this easier. I will make an offer on those so that we can wrap it all up if they so choose. Otherwise, I guess they'll have to be redistributed back to their respective courtrooms.
No problem. Anything from the defense?
I just wanted to, if we could have those all set on the docket that day as well.
I've already discussed that with the clerk. We will have all of the remaining cases on the docket that day.
All right, that is the end, my friend, of the Brice Rhodes trial. Convicted of killing 3 people, desecrating 2 corpses, and tampering with evidence, for which he gets a bunch of life imprisonments without the possibility of parole. That's all she wrote. Any final comments, Chandler?
Well, I feel like I cheated because I watched the beginning and now I'm watching the end. And I didn't have to really go through the whole middle part. But from what I understand, it sounds like it was an apt sentence, like it was well thought out and well decided. And I'm just sorry for the jury that they had to sit through Pat's, big sanctimonious moment there. But, I guess she was doing her job the best she could. You can't really blame her.
There you
I'm
go.
glad. I'm glad that he got that sentence. The crime was egregious and horrific. I think he's where he needs to be, and I think the sentence was appropriate.
I concur. That's kind of how I came down. I said, strictly speaking, he was clearly guilty of killing the first dude. The second 2, strictly going, I could think of some reasonable doubts, but it's clearly understandable to go, oh, he killed the first guy, so he probably killed the other guys that he was worried about ratting on him. So yeah, totally makes sense. Totally fair verdict. Totally fair sentence. And who you calling a cootie queen, you lint licker, says, Jeff, I'm stupid. What's March court date for? Again, what the jury did today is essentially just a recommendation. See, this is what the jury found. The judge still has to sign off on it. So for the next 3 months, she's going to be going over any post-trial motions. She's going to be reviewing the verdict, reviewing things, and then in March, she'll come back and say, okay, that's I agree with the jury, or I don't agree with the jury. Here's the actual sentence. So it'll be the final sentencing hearing. Vast majority of the cases, they sign off on what the jury recommends. And I'm going to recommend we shut this trial down. We are good and done. Thank you, everybody that went through this for a couple of weeks, and thank Chandler for being here at the beginning and the end. Ozzy apparently didn't wake up today. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if he wakes up eventually later. But right now, we're going to shut this baby down for good. And the next trial will probably be the YNW Melly trial starting in February. So that's probably the next thing that's going to be going for me. Awesome. And we're going to be back tomorrow night on Ozzy Overlord's channel for his Friday stream. Friday morning for you. Friday morning US for a Hayden stream. Then Friday evening, I'll be doing a Super Moddy Christmas. And mods, some of you got the links, the ones that I have easy access to, the mods account. Just mods, circulate this amongst yourselves. Make sure all of our mods get the link for tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It will be a very moddy Christmas for a couple of hours. Then if Danny does her year anniversary stream, I'll be joining her for that. And then we'll be into the Christmas weekend. So there we go. But right now we're going to ship on over. We're going to raid myself. We're going to raid myself. And we're going to go and do about an hour of OJ Simpson because it's OJ Thursday. We haven't done OJ in a bit, and we want to wrap that up as soon as possible so we can start on a new trial in a few weeks. So Chandler's going to be joining me over there as usual, and we'll be there. Should start. I'm going to bump this back 5 minutes to 1:15. It's scheduled to start in 3 minutes, but that's not going to be enough time for me to get set up. So let me hit the edit button, and we'll put it at 1:15 a.m. my time. So 15 minutes, 7 minutes from now is when we'll start that. All right, folks, so that we're not late for that, I'm going to let you all go now with a super, super sincere thanks to the mods for joining me for this trial, for hanging around, for doing stuff, and for you in chat for being here, for all the support you gave, all the super chats, the monthly memberships, and everything you gave throughout this trial. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you here, Chandler. And we're going to go on over to OJ Simpson now. So hang tight. And if you want to watch some of the closing arguments in the OJ Simpson trial, join us there. We're going to go raid it right now. I'll be there in about 7 minutes. So take care, everybody. We'll see you over at OJ. Don't go away. It could be interesting. Go back to 1995. And all right, again, to wrap this up, the end of the Brice Rhodes trial. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. We'll continue to post some short videos and things, some highlights of the trial over the next couple of weeks on the channel, just like those. And we'll see you later. Peace. Oot, as they say in Canada.